My daughter-in-law's phone was face up on the kitchen counter when I came in from shoveling the driveway. That's how it started. Not with a scene, not with raised voices or a door slammed in the middle of the night. Just a phone screen glowing in the dim November morning while Ingrid was in the shower down the hall. And a name on that screen I recognized immediately. 3 words underneath it that I read once, then again, standing there in my wet boots on the tile floor with snow melting off my coat. Miss you already, sweetheart. The message was from Clifton Ashby, my son's business partner. I set my snow shovel against the wall. I looked at the message for a long moment. From down the hall I could hear the shower running, and faintly, Ingrid humming something tuneless to herself, the way she always did in the morning. My son Darius was already at the job site in Barrie. He'd left at 6. He'd kissed my daughter-in-law on the cheek in the kitchen before I'd even come downstairs, and I'd watched from the staircase and thought, they look fine. They look like a couple that's figured out how to keep moving forward. I was wrong about that. My name is Edmund Farrow. I'm 63 years old, retired electrician, 28 years with the same company, a townhouse in Orillia, where I moved after my wife Colette passed 4 years ago. Darius had asked me to come down to their place in Barrie for a few weeks, help out with the new baby. His words. Ingrid was on mat leave, Darius was stretched thin running the renovation company he'd built from nothing, and their daughter Nora had just turned 6 weeks old. I was happy to come. I would have driven through a blizzard to come. I stood in that kitchen holding my gloves and I thought, I could put the phone face down and walk to the garage and pretend the screen never lit up. Then a second message came through. Tell me she slept better. I keep thinking about what you told me last night. My stomach went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. Darius had been up twice with Nora the night before. I'd heard him. I'd heard the floor creak outside my room at 2 in the morning, then again at 4:45. He'd sent me a text at 6:15 before leaving. She finally went down. You're a lifesaver, Dad. Don't let Ingrid lift anything heavy. Ingrid had been on the phone with someone last night. I'd assumed it was her mother in Sudbury. I picked up the phone. The conversation thread opened and I scrolled up. Not because I was looking for something to use against anyone. I want to be honest about that. I scrolled because something in the base of my skull had already made the calculation before the rest of me caught up, and I needed to either confirm or dismiss it before I said a single word out loud. The thread went back 11 months. I set the phone down and stood in the kitchen for a while, listening to my own breathing and the sound of the shower and, from the nursery, the small shuffling noises Nora made when she was cycling between sleep cycles. 6 weeks old. Darius had held her in the hospital with his whole body shaking, not from fear but from something I hadn't seen on his face since he was a boy. Pure, unguarded feeling. He'd looked up at me from the chair and said, "She looks like Mum, doesn't she?" And I'd said yes, because she did. Because I'd wanted that to be true for both of us. I took 2 screenshots and sent them to my own phone. Then I set Ingrid's phone back exactly where it had been, face up, same angle. I walked to the nursery and stood in the doorway and looked at Nora for a long time. I'll tell you who Clifton Ashby was because it matters. He and Darius had met through a mutual contact in the trades about 3 years back. Clifton ran the project management side, contracts, scheduling, client relationships, while Darius handled the builds themselves. Good arrangement on paper. Clifton was the kind of man who remembered everyone's coffee order, and always picked up the lunch tab and made it look effortless. The kind of man who got described as a real connector in professional circles and who probably described himself that way too. Mid-40s, divorced. A condo in Collingwood, and a lease on a truck that was too clean for someone who actually worked on job sites. I'd met him 4 or 5 times. Each time I'd noticed the way he spoke to Ingrid, easy, almost proprietary. The particular familiarity of someone who believes they've earned a certain access. I'd noticed it, and I'd told myself I was an old man reading too much into things. I was not reading too much into anything. I went back to the kitchen and made coffee. When Ingrid came out 20 minutes later in her housecoat, Nora on her shoulder, she looked surprised to see me standing at the counter. "I thought you were still outside," she said. "Finished early," I said. "Sit down, I'll hold her." And I did. I sat at the kitchen table with my granddaughter against my chest, and I drank my coffee, and I listened to Ingrid talk about the feeding schedule, and a new sleep consultant she'd read about online. And I said the right things at the right moments, and I felt like I was performing a version of myself from the inside of a glass box. That afternoon, while Ingrid napped and Nora slept in the bassinet, I opened my phone and searched for Clifton Ashby on LinkedIn, then Facebook. His profile was mostly professional. Project showcases, industry events. One photo of him at what looked like a charity golf tournament outside Muskoka. Tan, well-dressed, the particular ease of a man who had never once doubted that rooms were meant to welcome him. I sat looking at his profile for a long time. Then I searched for his ex-wife. Her name from the thread I'd seen was Gwendolyn. I found her quickly, a physiotherapist in Collingwood, profile picture taken outdoors near Georgian Bay, 2 kids in matching raincoats behind her, squinting into the sun. She had one of those faces that looked like it had once been very open and was now carefully composed, like someone who had learned, at some cost, how much to show. I stared at her profile for a long time. I thought about what I knew and what I could prove and what I owed to my son and what I owed to a woman I had never met, and what any of that had to do with a 6-week-old baby sleeping 10 feet away. Then I opened a message window and I started to type. I want to stop here and be honest about something, because the next part is not the part I'm proud of, and I think honesty matters more than a clean story. I almost didn't send it. I sat there for probably 20 minutes with the message half written on my screen, and I thought about what I might be setting in motion. Marriages have complicated weather. There are things inside other people's relationships you can't see from the outside. And sometimes the damage done by exposure is worse than the damage done by the thing being exposed. I knew that. I've been alive long enough to know that. But then I thought about Darius leaving at 6 in the morning. I thought about him texting me at 6:15 to say she'd finally gone down. "You're a lifesaver, Dad." I thought about him in that hospital room saying she looks like Mum. And I thought about the word already in that text. Miss you already. Past tense of a present that hadn't ended. I sent Gwendolyn the screenshots. "I don't know if you already know," I wrote, "but I think you deserve to." Then I walked to the garage and stood in the cold for a while, and I was still standing there when my phone buzzed. She'd responded in 8 minutes. "I didn't know," she wrote, "but I suspected. Can we talk?" I called her from the garage with the door cracked open, the November air coming in cold off the water, and Gwendolyn Ashby spoke to me for almost 45 minutes in a voice that was very carefully controlled. The voice of someone who has had to practice not falling apart. She'd suspected for about 4 months. She'd found a hotel confirmation on a shared account. She'd asked Clifton about it and he'd explained it away, and she'd let him, because she had 2 kids in the house and a practice she'd built over 15 years. And because when you've been with someone for a long time, the alternative feels less like freedom and more like amputation. "My children spent time with her," she said, at the end. Just that. I didn't say anything. I had nothing to say that would help. What I did say was, "There's a 6-week-old baby in this house and my son doesn't know any of this." A silence on the line. "What do you need from me?" she asked. I thought about it. "Just to know someone else has the same information I do," I said, "and that we're both being honest about what we do with it." She said she understood. She said she'd been carrying it alone for 4 months, and that carrying it alone was its own particular kind of damage. We said we'd be in touch. I went back inside and made lunch, and Ingrid came out from her nap looking tired and grateful, and I set a plate in front of her and sat across the table from her, and looked at this woman my son had chosen and loved and built a life with. And I tried to understand how people arrive at the decisions they make when they think no one is watching. I didn't arrive at anything. Darius came home at 6:30. Boots off at the door, coat on the hook, straight to the bassinet in the living room. He did that every night. Didn't even take off his work vest before he went to check on Nora. He'd stand there for a minute just looking at her, like he was confirming she was still real. "Long one?" I asked from the kitchen. "Site inspection ran over," he said. "Clifton didn't show." I turned back to the stove. "Again? 3rd time in 6 weeks." He came into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. "He's got some stuff going on, I don't know." I handed him a plate and didn't say anything. Here's the thing about choosing to wait. You think it will feel like patience. It doesn't. It feels like wearing a second skin that doesn't fit properly. You move through the ordinary motions of the day, conversation and meals and the specific rhythms of a house with a newborn. And underneath all of it is this constant low hum, like a generator running in a basement. You can't hear it exactly, but you feel it in your back teeth. I stayed 3 more days. I helped with night feeds. I shoveled the driveway again after a fresh 6 centimeters came down. I sat with Nora in the mornings while Darius showered and Ingrid slept in, and I looked at this child in the early light of a Barrie November, her face small and specific and entirely itself, and I thought about the word hour. I thought about how that word gets used by people who have no right to it. On the 3rd morning I drove back to Orillia. I want to tell you who I am because in a story like this the kind of man you are matters a great deal. I worked for the same electrical contractor for 28 years, started as a journeyman, and retired as crew foreman. Colette and I bought our house in Orillia in 1989. We raised Darius in that house, kept the same 2 chairs by the front window for 20 years, planted the same garden every spring. When Colette got sick it came fast, the way it sometimes does, and she was gone inside 14 months of the diagnosis. I sold the house 18 months after that because I couldn't sit in it without hearing her in every room. The townhouse I moved into is smaller and quieter, and I am still, 4 years later, not entirely used to either. Darius is all I have left of the version of my life I'd planned on keeping. That's not a complaint. It's just a fact. I got home to Orillia on a Thursday. On Saturday morning, Gwendolyn called. "He didn't come home last night," she said. "He texted at 10. Said he was at a client dinner in Barrie." Her voice was steady in the way that only works when you've been preparing for the call you're making. "The kids are at my mother's." I asked her if she was all right. "No," she said. "But I know what I need to do now. I've known for a while." A pause. "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Darius doesn't know yet." "No, how much longer do you plan to wait?" I'd been asking myself the same question for 5 days. I'd turned it over every which way. The argument for waiting was that I needed to be certain about what I'd seen, certain about the right moment, certain I wasn't about to blow up my son's marriage and his business partnership on the basis of a text thread I'd read on someone else's phone. The argument against waiting was that every day I waited was a day Darius was operating on false information about his own life. A man has a right to know what's happening inside it. "Soon," I said. "I have more," she said quietly. "More than what you saw." She drove up on a Wednesday while Darius was in Barrie and Ingrid was at a postnatal appointment. She parked in front of my townhouse and came inside and sat at my kitchen table and opened her laptop, and we sat together for 2 hours going through what she'd found in the months she'd spent suspecting and then confirming. Shared documents, hotel reservations in Huntsville and Toronto, messages forwarded from a backup account she'd discovered by accident on the family iPad. Financial records. $12,000 moved from a joint investment account over 8 months. The transfers timed around weekends when Gwendolyn had been working. "He told me the transfers were for equipment deposits on a new project," she said. Her voice was flat. Not angry, flat, the way a voice gets when the anger has been sitting out so long it's gone to something harder. "Did you ask him about it?" "He said he'd sort it out by end of year." She looked at her laptop screen. "That was 6 months ago." We sat there in my kitchen in Orillia, the lake visible through the back window, gray and flat under the cloud cover. The furnace kicked on. Outside, a car went by on the street. Ordinary Wednesday afternoon in a town of 30,000 people. And my world was reorganizing itself around a table covered in printed email. There was one exchange that landed like a fist. Ingrid, in a message from July. "D still hasn't figured it out. He's so wrapped up in the business he barely notices." Clifton's response, "Keep it that way a little longer. I'm working on the financials." I read that twice. "Working on the financials," I said. Gwendolyn looked at me. "I think he was planning to buy Darius out." I sat back in my chair. Everything I'd assumed about the shape of this situation shifted slightly, and what replaced it was worse. Not just an affair. Not just betrayal in the personal sense. Clifton Ashby had been operating a second agenda inside my son's company. While Darius was on job sites in Barrie at 6 in the morning, his partner was moving money, mapping an exit, building towards something that would leave Darius with whatever was left over after Clifton took what he'd decided was his. I'm 63 years old. I have had difficult moments in my life. The day I buried Colette. The morning I got the call that Darius had been in a car accident on the 400, and I drove to the hospital not knowing what I was driving toward. Those moments have a specific gravity. They pull you out of ordinary time into something heavier. This was in that category. "What do you want to do?" I asked Gwendolyn. She closed the laptop carefully. "I've retained a lawyer," she said. "Financial disclosure motion. I need everything documented before I say anything to him directly." "That's smart. What about you?" I looked at the lake through the back window for a while. "My son is running a business with a man who is stealing from him," I said. "I'm not going to sit on that." She nodded slowly. She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive and set it on the table. "Everything is on there," she said, "organized by date, in case you need it." I picked it up and held it for a moment. It felt very light for what it contained. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from maintaining a performance over time. Not dramatic, not visible. It sits behind your sternum and presses outward, constant and low, while you go about the surface things. Answering emails, returning calls, driving the familiar 40 minutes down to Barrie to help with Nora when Darius had a long week. I did all of those things. I showed up when I was needed. I said the right things. I held my granddaughter and watched my son watch his daughter with an openness I was not willing to damage until I was ready and certain and positioned to protect him properly. I kept going over the timing question. Every calculation led back to the same place. Darius needed to know, and he needed to know from me in a moment I controlled, not from a rumor or a discovery or an overheard conversation that I hadn't prepared him for. In early December, a Renovators Industry Association held their annual year-end dinner at a hotel in downtown Barrie. Darius went every year. Clifton always attended. This year I had an invitation because Darius had put my name on the guest list months ago. "You should come down, Dad, it's a good room, you'd know half the people there from the old days." I hadn't planned to go, and then I decided I should. I drove down on a Friday afternoon, checked into a room on the 6th floor of the hotel, went downstairs and got a coffee and sat in the lobby and looked at the room until the other guests started arriving. Darius was there at 7. In his good jacket, the one Colette had bought him for a Christmas party years ago, that still fit him perfectly. He looked genuinely happy to see me. That nearly undid me. "Didn't think you were coming," he said. "Changed my mind," I said. Clifton Ashby arrived at 7:20 with a glass of wine already in his hand, working the room immediately. He made it to us in about 10 minutes. Handshake, smile, the whole performance. "Edmund," he said as if I were a pleasant surprise. "Didn't know you were in town. Last-minute decision," I said. We exchanged a few sentences about the industry, the weather, a renovation project in Innisfil that had come in under budget. He was smooth, I'll say that for him. Whatever he was carrying, it didn't show. He had the composure of a man who had managed competing stories for long enough that the management had become automatic. At 8:30, Gwendolyn walked in. She'd texted me that morning. "I think I should be there." I'd said I thought she should too. Clifton saw her from across the room. The composure flickered for exactly 1 second, then resealed. He excused himself from the group he was speaking with and walked directly toward her, and I watched him do it, and I thought, this is what a man looks like when he believes he can still manage a situation. He couldn't. In the corridor outside the main room, the three of us stood together. Clifton with his wine glass, Gwendolyn with a folder, me with my hands in my pockets. "This isn't the place," he said quietly. To her, not to me, as if I wasn't standing there. "I know," she said. "That's exactly why I chose it." He glanced at me then, recalibrating. "Edmund, I don't know what she's told you, but whatever's happening between Gwendolyn and me is a private matter." "The $12,000 isn't private," I said. That stopped him. I watched the calculation run behind his eyes. He was a smart man. I could see him running through his options, mapping exit routes, deciding which version of this he could still shape. He chose the version I'd been hoping for. "Listen," he said, voice dropping, leaning slightly forward. "Darius doesn't need to know everything that's happened this year. Nobody benefits from that. There's real money on the table with the Innisfil project and the Orillia commercial contract. We could structure something that—" I had my phone in my coat pocket. I'd pressed record in the lobby before I came outside. "Structure something how?" I said. He kept talking. Specifics now. Numbers. The smooth language of a man who genuinely believed that all problems were transactions and all transactions were negotiable. I nodded along. The recording ran. When he finished, I said, "I need to make a call." I walked about 6 feet away, dialed Darius. He picked up on the third ring. "Dad, where are you? I couldn't find you in the room." "I'm in the corridor," I said. "I need you to come out here." A pause. "Everything okay?" "No," I said. "But I'm here, and I'm going to explain it." The next 10 minutes were the hardest of my life. Harder than I'd prepared for, even having prepared. Because watching your son understand something is different from understanding it yourself. You can carry your own pain with a certain detachment that comes from being inside it. But watching it arrive on your child's face, the specific moment the architecture shifts behind someone's eyes, that you cannot detach from, that lands in the place where all the armor isn't. Darius looked at the screenshots on my phone. He looked at Clifton. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at me. "How long have you known?" 12 days, I said. "I needed to do it right." He nodded slowly. One single nod that contained more than I could name. Then he turned to Clifton Ashby and he said, in a voice that was very quiet and very level, "I want the full financial disclosure on the partnership account by Monday. My lawyer will be in touch before noon." Clifton started to say something. Darius held up one hand, just slightly, and Clifton stopped. We went back inside. Darius sat at the table for about 20 minutes, spoke to the people he needed to speak to, and then we left together. Outside in the hotel parking lot, the temperature was sitting around -8, and the pavement was salted and the sky was that hard clear black that only happens in Ontario in December when there's no cloud cover. He stood by his truck for a while. "Nora looks like Mum," he said finally. Not to me exactly, just out loud. "Yes," I said. "She does." He nodded again, got in his truck, drove home. I stayed in the hotel that night. In the room on the 6th floor, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time looking at nothing in particular. And I thought about all of it. The phone screen on the kitchen counter, the messages it scrolled through, the drive back to Orillia with this thing sitting in the passenger seat beside me, the weeks of ordinary surface and extraordinary underneath. Then I turned the television off and lay back and looked at the ceiling and eventually slept. The next months were not clean. They were not the kind of months that arrive in order and stay that way. Darius retained a business lawyer in Barrie. The financial audit of the partnership account took 6 weeks and found discrepancies going back 14 months. The Innisfil project was put on hold pending the audit. 2 of their subcontractors, men Darius had worked with for years, came forward on their own after the audit notice went out. They'd been asked to run invoices through a subsidiary account that Darius hadn't known existed. Clifton had been building a parallel infrastructure inside the company, and Darius had been too busy on job sites to see it happening. In March, Clifton Ashby agreed to a settlement rather than face the fraud investigation that the audit made possible. He gave up his equity stake in the partnership, repaid the diverted funds, and signed a non-compete that kept him out of the Simcoe County market for 3 years. His professional reputation, built over 15 years in the trades network across central Ontario, came apart in the particular quiet way that reputations do when everyone hears the same story from enough different sources. He moved to Calgary. As far as I know, he is still there. Gwendolyn filed for divorce in February. The financial disclosure motion went through, the hidden account was included in the settlement. And when everything was done, she got the Collingwood condo and enough to restructure without the weight of someone else's debts. We still exchange the occasional message. There's a particular solidarity in having been through something together, even when you didn't choose each other's company for any other reason. That doesn't fully dissolve. The harder part, the part nobody talks about clearly, was what happened between Darius and Ingrid. I'm not going to pretend I know the interior of their marriage. I never did. Ingrid told Darius at some point in December that the affair with Clifton had started during a difficult stretch, a period when Darius was working 7-day weeks and she had felt invisible. She said it had ended before Nora was born. She said she was sorry in the way people say it when they mean it, and also understand that meaning it doesn't undo what was done. What I know is that they went to counseling. What I know is that my son called me in February, late on a Thursday evening, and said, "I don't know if we're going to make it, Dad." And I said, "I don't know either, but you don't have to decide tonight." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "How did you know when to tell me about Clifton?" I thought about it. "When I was sure I could tell you in a way that let you stay standing," I said. Another silence. "Okay," he said finally. "Just that. What I know is that by spring they were still in the house together. Whether that was for Nora or for themselves or for some combination of reasons that aren't mine to categorize, I couldn't say. I didn't ask. Some things belong to the people inside them. Nora is 8 months old now. She comes to Orillia every second weekend. I have a high chair in the kitchen and a basket of toys in the corner of the living room and a portable cot set up in what used to be Colette's sewing room. On those weekends I take her to the lake when the weather allows, and I sit on the bench near the water, with her in my arms, and I tell her about her grandmother. I tell her about the garden and the chairs by the front window and the way Colette laughed when something genuinely surprised her, which was less and less as she got older and then not at all. Nora doesn't understand any of it yet, but I say it anyway because it matters to me that she will. Last month Darius drove up on a Saturday morning unannounced, while Nora was still asleep in the back room. He came in and sat at the kitchen table and I made coffee and we sat there together without saying much for a while, the way we'd learned to sit after Colette died, when words kept running out before the feeling did. Eventually he said, "I want you to know I don't blame you for waiting." I looked at him. 12 days, he said. "That's not a long time to figure out how to tell your son something like that." "It felt long," I said. He nodded. "I know." We finished the coffee. He checked on Nora. He drove back to Barrie. I stood in the kitchen after he left and listened to the house settle around me. The furnace cycling, the faint sound of the lake through the walls, the small sounds Nora was making as she started to wake up. People don't talk about what it costs to protect someone carefully. The versions of yourself you put away in order to keep your hands steady. The conversations you don't have yet because the moment hasn't arrived for them. It doesn't feel like strength while you're doing it. It feels like holding your breath underwater and hoping you've judged the distance right. I went to get Nora. She was sitting up in the cot, looking at the wall with the particular concentrated expression she'd inherited from her father. Forehead slightly creased, absolutely serious about nothing in particular. I picked her up and she grabbed my collar and pulled herself up toward my face. And I said good morning, and she said something that wasn't a word yet but was already heading in that direction. Some mornings, that's enough to build the whole day around. If you've ever been the one who knew something the people you love didn't know yet. If you've ever held that weight while life kept moving in every direction and asked you to keep moving with it. Drop a 1 in the comments. I want to know I'm not the only one who has stood in a kitchen, in wet boots wondering what the right thing costs. Drop a 2 if there's something you would have handled differently. And drop a 3 if you're watching this with someone else in the room, someone you'd do any of it over again for. Where are you watching from tonight? It's cold up here in Orillia. I'd like to know who's out there. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, written and reimagined to explore themes of loyalty, family, and trust. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental.